Good morning, everybody. Brian Newbert here from GoldandBlack.com with the highlight of your day, if not your week, if not your month, if not your year, your GoldandBlack.com Purdue Basketball Daily for today, Wednesday, whatever today's date is. Um, Today's topic, I just wrote a big deep dive sort of thing on Purdue's defense and its threshold for improvement this year. I'd encourage you to go read it at GoldandBlack.com. I got it done after hours, as I so often do, posted it at a completely illogical time, just in time for more stuff to go on top of it to push it out of prominence on our website. So by all means, if you are a GoldandBlack.com subscriber, go to GoldandBlack.com, read that story. I think it's pretty insightful, but I am biased. But I just wanted to plug that real quick. It is context for what I'm about to talk about here too. So I guess I just wanted to, as I scraped the bottom of the barrel already for topics, I wanted to talk about defensive matchups and defensive personnel and things like that. I do think Purdue can be, ought to be, might be a better defensive team this year than they were last year, and I think it bears mentioning that Purdue was a much better defensive team last year than it was the year before. That was in large part due to more attentive personnel. I think it was due to Ross-Ade turning into one of the most influential defensive players in college basketball and a variety of other factors. But I do think Purdue was good enough defensively to obviously have a great year last year. Were there tricky matchups? Yes. Jalen Hood-Schifino, namely, was the one guy on the schedule Purdue could not guard. There are always complications that come with playing with a massive human being at center, and the general mobility detriment you might have there. Even though Ross-Ade is abnormally agile and abnormally mobile for somebody that size, you just don't see size like that. They can be as nimble as modern basketball generally requires big men to be, both in ball screen stuff, in just playing all over the floor type of stuff. But Purdue certainly maxed out its assets, I think, last year from a defensive perspective, when you consider the fact, too, that they were so inexperienced. Having two freshman guards is never a perfect situation from a defensive standpoint. But I don't think Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer were the open wounds you typically fear that freshmen will be. I think this year it's an entirely different deal. I think Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer will be better defenders this year than they were last year. I think Braden Smith has a lot of potential to be a plus defender on the ball, a real nuisance with the depth now at play, too, with Lance Jones and Ethan Morton being well established, too, for him to, maybe be a little more even a little more aggressive from a defensive perspective. I think Fletcher Lawyer obviously will be one of those guys who's going to have to kind of survive man to man, but also probably cognitively will end up being a pretty good defender in a team concept, which is more important than people give it credit for. But I think Purdue's got a lot of assets here. I think obviously Ross-Ade is your starting point. He's an elite rim protector when he's at the rim. He's one of the best defensive rebounders in college basketball, and that is part of defense. People don't always acknowledge it as such, but that is a big part of defense. You can play the best defense the sport of basketball has ever seen for 30 seconds, and then if you don't get the rebound, who cares? Purdue's a great defensive rebounding team, and that's a big part of it. I think on the perimeter, Lance Jones is transformative. That might be overstatement ever so slightly, but I think having a guy who's really good on the ball, who's got the physical ability to be pretty good off the ball, versatile enough to guard three positions. He guarded everybody at Southern Illinois. Really wants to do it. I think he's one of those guys too, comes in here understanding that his place on this team is his fastest route to being a guy who really, really makes a difference on a potentially great team is at the defensive end of the floor. And I don't think you can overstate the importance of a guy embracing that right away. That's what's really kind of struck me about him is he understands where he can really, really help this team this year. And I think he can be. I wrote yesterday, he's a guy who's got the physical tools enough to be the best Purdue's had in a variety of different roles since No Joe Eastern. Because I think he can guard the ball, he can guard off the ball, and he can be equally good doing both, assuming he picks up the nuance of guarding away from the basketball. That's what makes an off-ball defender good more than anything else, is just understanding and scouting and preparing and kind of things like that. But I think the transaction column for Purdue last year was a significant net gain simply by bringing in Lance Jones. Not to put too much pressure on him there, but I think he's a guy who will be one of Purdue's best defensive players, obviously, if not its best defensive player. I think Ethan Morton is a guy who's kind of easy to forget about because of so many other new things have kind of come along. Lance Jones, Miles Colvin, Camden Heide, but I think obviously he's a proven and experienced defender too. It's not been often at Purdue where you have two of these guys, where they're two perimeter defenders you can count on. Now, how much Ethan Morton and Lance Jones are going to be on the floor together, I don't know. I think that would be pretty sparse, probably. But you do have two guys now that, if you have a fire to put out from an offensive perspective, from a matchup perspective, you do have two guys you can probably rely on. And then when you take into account Braden Smith, the jump he should take defensively, that's a pretty good starting point on the perimeter right there. Much was made all offseason, and rightfully so, of Camden Heide, Miles Colvin, and Brian Waddell on the wing. Colvin's got a lot to learn. I think I think that goes without saying. We'll see where he winds up. Camden Heide, I can't say I've got a strong pulse on where he sits defensively at this point, but he's at least been in the program for a year. He's certainly got the body and the athleticism to do it. I know Brian Waddell is a guy that I think will do the right things much more often than not. I think he'll be a pretty reliable guy from an assignment perspective, stuff like that. He's tall, he's long, he's athletic. It's just a matter of whether or not he can be physical enough at this stage of his career to be a really good defender. But I think he's a guy you can expect to be out there doing the right things. So Purdue's got some real options on the perimeter this year, much more than it had last year. And I think that's a pretty significant net gain for Purdue from a defensive perspective. The front court, obviously, there's going to be some complications when they've got Trey Kaufman-Renn at the 4. Those aren't ideal defensive lineups. I think Purdue has no concerns whatsoever about whether he and Zach-Edey playing together can work from an offensive standpoint. But I think the questions would lie at a defensive, at the defensive end. Purdue typically switches 1 through 4, and that's not something Trey Kaufman-Renn had to do last season because he played almost exclusively center, if not exclusively center. I can't remember him playing alongside another center last year. I think Caleb Furst is a good defensive player for his position. I think he's much more mobile. I think the reason he was at forward mostly last season was because he was better suited for the defensive end of the floor at his position than Trey Kaufman-Renn was, and kind of a lot went into that, but that's where things were. But I think that Caleb Furst is a guy who fits pretty well into this big picture from a defensive improvement perspective as well. Man, I sure use the word perspective a lot, don't I? Obviously when you have Zach-Edey, there's going to be some give and take there. I think he's the starting point for Purdue from a defensive angle, and Purdue will again build its defense around protecting him, around having him protect the rim, making sure he is asserting himself on the glass. That's gonna require some some attention from a help perspective when he gets pulled out of the play. So one of Purdue's big emphases this year is making sure they're better at covering him when he's taken out of plays, whether it be ball screens or whatever, or his guy just dragging him away from the basket and driving on him. So Purdue's got to be better in its team concept this year. I don't anticipate Purdue to do a whole lot different this year. I think situationally, sometimes you might see. I think it would suit Purdue well to, if there's a Jalen Hood-Schifino, a guy who's just killing you, to maybe mix things up a little bit. They're not going to play zone. They're not going to press. That stuff's illogical for this team. It really is. But I do sort of wonder if they won't, kind of tweak things on a game-to-game basis sometimes in terms of trapping the ball, getting it out of somebody's hands or whatever. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that front, but Purdue does have more eyeballs on this now. That they've got Paul Lusk and Terry Johnson working with the defense now. So I think how that works out is Purdue rotates scouting reports, which means that theoretically your scouting reports should have more man hours put into them all season long, which I think can be a net positive too. How exactly that impacts things, I don't know. We will see how that plays out, but I think Purdue's got the ability to be really good defensively. Well, really good might be taken a lot of ways. I think that they can be a lot better than they were last season, and they were pretty good last year. They were 24th nationally in efficiency according to KenPom, and that's a good number. As I said before, there were tricky matchups at times. There were people they flat out could not guard. But what they were doing by and large, broadly, was working. And their season did not flame out in March because of defense. It flamed out because of offense. And you were good enough defensively to win 29 games prior to that day and win the Big Ten by 3 games. And I think that, you can build on that this year. So gone are the days of Purdue playing 1990s or early 2000s pressuring defense and all that stuff. But I think Purdue has really started to make progress in terms of its new defensive identity as a more offensively inclined program too. So this year they can take another big step forward and would really like to. So that's what I got for today in today's GoldandBlack.com Purdue Basketball Daily. As I mentioned before, go check out that big defensive story I put up on our site last night. I think it'll be worth your time. So thanks a lot, everybody. Bye.